Você que tá aí ouvindo o podcast, sabia que o poder de construir a carreira profissional dos seus sonhos também está em suas mãos? Na pós-graduação do Senac, você encontra diversos cursos com 12 meses de duração, além de estudar com aulas presenciais mais EAD. E tem mais, o TCC é opcional. Tudo isso para você conciliar trabalho, estudos e vida social. Quer mais? Você também pode ter até 50% de desconto. Confira as condições no site sp.senac.br/pós-graduação. Quer saber? Senac.
Today on Cast Madison. Whether you're walking, biking, driving, or riding transit, you getting around safely is a top priority for the city. And it shows. Madison was recently named number 2 in the country for pedestrian safety. Walk it out. But how did we get here? We asked our City of Madison Director of Transportation, Tom Lynch, to give us the latest on the city's efforts to reduce speeds, improve street design, and broaden our vision for public transit. It's Monday, July 8th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Director Lynch, hello.
Hello, Bianca. This is exciting. I've wanted to be on CityCast for a while. Now's my day.
Today's your day, and we've wanted you on as well. So I'm so glad to see you and thrilled that you wanted to come on the show. That really makes my heart happy. And another thing that makes my heart happy, I assume it does yours as well, we were named the second most walkable city in America. Woo! Yeah. Go us.
Yeah. We're doing well in pedestrians. We're doing well with cyclists, too. We're a platinum city as well with cyclists, but just because we have these national rankings doesn't mean that there's not more work to do. There's lots of parts of the city that are not as good as they could be.
Well, thank you for that very responsible answer, and we're going to get into it. But we did get this recognition. I'd have to think it doesn't happen by accident. You know, what do you attribute us being named the most walkable city to, and are we worthy?
I do want to say that, there are parts that we need improvement, but I'm going to say for decades, back to the 1970s and 80s, there were people that valued walking and biking in Madison. So through these, I might call them legacy investments, through our Lake Loop bike path, our Capital City Trail, our Southwest bike path. These are improvements that are huge, but they were put in decades ago because people decades ago had the foresight that we needed to provide access to all modes of transportation, not just motor vehicles, but also pedestrians and cyclists.
And I know that you think in historical lenses because you actually gave me a personal presentation of the history of transportation on Madison, which I was so charmed by. And also 5 minutes in felt totally guilty because I was like, I wish my whole team could see this because it's so fascinating. You've been at the helm for 6 years, but these streets, a lot of them predate you. Obviously, that's kind of how it works. So we have to work with what we have and how to build moving forward. And I feel like a key point of discussion is the city's Vision Zero plan to eliminate all traffic deaths. So 0 traffic deaths by 2035. That started up in 2020. Can you talk about where are we at for that plan?
Yeah, so I'm going to take one step back and just say, literally for decades, all across America, we kind of leaned into auto transportation, right? You think about how great an auto is. You can go to work when you want to. You can live where you want to. And through interstate, the Federal Highway Act and the like, we just said, let's lean into cars, and get where we want to go and when we want to go. And back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there was really nothing stopping us from doing that. But now we're in the 2020s, and we see that there's some perhaps unintended consequences from that, right? One of the unintended consequences is that, the highway deaths. We have 46,000 highway deaths in America in 2022. 46,000, that's a lot. In 2023, the city of Madison had 17 traffic fatalities. And so, the safety aspects of the motor vehicle, as well as some of the environmental effects, right? Right now, we have about 33% more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere than we did in the 1960s. So that's something.
It's huge.
It's huge. And so I'm going to say probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we kind of changed the paradigm. The paradigm used to be, well, how do we move cars safely through this intersection, right? And make sure there isn't delay to motor vehicle traffic. And we started changing the paradigm, saying, well, how do we move people safely through this intersection? Which includes cars, but also includes cyclists and pedestrians. It's okay if someone gets to work 2 minutes later if maybe we have 5 less traffic fatalities in the city. I think perhaps a highlight was I think it was 2022, where we had 5 pedestrian deaths on East Washington. 5. So, each one of those deaths was like a father or a brother or a child of someone, right? And those families are fully impacted, forever impacted. And so rather than focusing on, can we get cars through this intersection quicker, we're saying, can we get people through this intersection safer?
Yeah. And it seems like back when the move to prioritize automobiles was going on, it was anchoring and prioritizing sort of suburban commuters. And that was the thing. And now, if I'm correct, there's a new prioritization of everyone on the streets. How did the streets work for everyone is one of the main proponents of the Vision Zero plan.
Yeah, that's correct. I think, like I said, basically from 1970s to the 2010s, right, in that period, a lot of America said we don't want to live in the city and more of the suburbs. And that was true of Dane County, too. Madison was a hub up until about the 1960s where people wanted to move to Madison. Then from the 70s to 2010, our suburbs, the Sun Prairies and the Fishwicks grew more rapidly than the city of Madison. That's changed right now, where we're Madison is growing and our suburbs are growing. We're working together as partner communities. And I think we all want to see the safety improvements that we now know are really needed.
And I have to say, as a resident, it is visible in our city streets. I went to the university, 12 years ago. The streets look pretty different in terms of walkways and, bike paths. But even the past 2 years that I've been back in Madison, there is very clearly a marked effort to signal to vehicles, hey, you're not the only ones here, and signal to pedestrians and bikers, like, this is a huge color block. This is your color block. You guys have actually put a lot of thought into that psychology of user experience.
Yeah. So we have a couple of different initiatives that have been enacted over the last 5 years. One is the Vision Zero, and coupled with that Vision Zero, as we call it, Safe Streets Madison, where we do about $1.5 million worth of improvements. And those are kind of low-cost improvements. Equally as important was an initiative we called Complete Green Streets. And I'm just going to say, for the last 40 or 50 years, our ordinances and our subdivision ordinances mandated kind of wide streets because we wanted to make sure there was enough room for cars and parking and all that. So we would build the street, and then if there was enough room left over, we'd put in a bike lane or a sidewalk. Well, the Complete Green Streets ordinance, which was passed a year or so ago, changed all that. So it basically says, well, no, our most important and most vulnerable users are our pedestrians and our cyclists. And so we make sure that we have room for them. Then we provide room for the transit and the motor vehicles. And probably last of all is parking. And so you can see the fruits of this. I don't know if you've been on Wilson Street this year, but west of the Capitol, it has kind of a cycle path. Broome Street has a cycle path. Hammersley Road has kind of a pedestrian shared use path, so that we're making sure that on these roads that are being reconstructed or the new roads on our periphery that are being built, cars are not the first priority. They're the third or fourth priority. We want to make sure that we get the vulnerable users in there first.
Enquanto você ouve suas músicas e podcasts favoritos, deixa eu te perguntar, você já sabe da novidade do ano? Chegou a nova Fiat Titano. A nova picape da Fiat faz bonito nos terrenos mais desafiadores. Performance com motor turbo diesel 4x4 e câmera 360 graus off-road, que ajudam você a ultrapassar qualquer obstáculo. Sem falar que ela tem a maior caçamba da categoria. Tá esperando o que para conhecer? Nova Fiat Titano, chegou a sua vez de fazer história. Paz no trânsito começa por você.
I want to ask about Vision Zero. Is it working? What are the measures of success?
It's too early to say. I think 2023, we actually had more fatalities than 2022. I think in 23, we had 17 fatalities. 2022, we had 14. Before 2022, 2021, we actually had quite a few. We had 17 again. It's somewhat random. What we like to do is we like to say, are we on the right trend? And so we use a 5-year rolling average. And so we're working on that 5-year rolling average. Some cities have gotten there. They've gotten to zero. Like Hoboken, New Jersey has gotten to zero. Oslo, Norway has gotten to zero. So we want to be on that path.
And I think I saw an interview with the mayor talking about how the city, you all have actually met with Hoboken, New Jersey, to be like, what are you guys doing right? You know, were there any learnings from that kind of are salient today on what you're implementing here in Madison?
Yeah, we had a conference call with Hoboken, New Jersey. We also were at a conference recently where they presented. Many big cities, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, are kind of struggling with how to take Vision Zero to the next step. And I think they're finding that you can do a little bit with these targeted individual improvements, but if you can focus on maybe more systematic improvements that affect the whole system, for instance, speed limits, right turns on reds, those types of things, you can get a little bit bigger bang for your buck. And so we're evaluating that. In fact, this year and next year, I think all of our neighborhoods will be part of the 20 is plenty. And so all of our citywide neighborhood speed limit will be 20 miles an hour within about 18 months.
Wow. At 20 miles per hour?
20 miles an hour.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're talking about that, because that's one of the things I saw recently is your guys' focus on speed and how big of a deal speed really is and the outcomes for car crashes. I saw that just this summer, there are 9 new roadway locations that are dropping their speed limit. That's on top of 38 other locations where speed limits have been reduced. Can you talk about why focus on speed?
Yeah. So let's say I'm a pedestrian and I'm crossing a roadway. And if I get hit by a car going 20 miles an hour, I have a 9 in 10 chance of living, only a 1 in 10 chance of getting killed. But if that car is going 40 miles an hour instead, there's a 7 in 10 chance that I'll be killed. So that's a big deal. So if we can keep people away from 40 miles an hour and get them closer to 30 or 20 miles an hour, we save lives. We want to prevent any car, bicycle, pedestrian impacts. But if that impact does occur, if the car is going slower, the person gets to live. So there has been some criticism saying, well, people are still going 35 miles an hour, even though you lowered the speed limit to 30 miles an hour. And we are finding that we are getting a very small decrease in the average speed when we lower. But as far as the cars that are going 10 to 15 miles above the speed limit, we are finding a large decrease in those outliers. So while maybe if we lower, we'll see a 1 or 2 mile an hour decrease in the average speed if we lower our speed limit. But the number of people that are excessively speeding, we've found, is greatly reduced, 3 to 5 times fewer than would otherwise occur.
Wow. So I'm thinking of is that the case for East Washington, one of our major roadways? I feel like that's one of the ones that are most discussed with the speed changes. They changed the speed, but people are still going faster. But you're saying maybe that's not really true if you look at the data.
Yeah. The people going 45 on East Washington, much fewer, right? And if you get hit with a car going 45 miles an hour, 9 in 10 chance you're going to die. So if we can cut those cars out.
Well, so speed is obviously key. We are trying to, as a city, get to 0 deaths. We're curious about what you're seeing lately about where are our most vulnerable spots. We talked about East Wash, for instance. Are there hot spots or tough intersections that you guys are targeting through the data that you've collected? Yeah,
so we have kind of 2 programs that we use. We have a Safe Streets Madison program where we have about $1.5 million to do small targeted improvements throughout the city. And then we were also awarded a $7 million Safe Streets for All grant from the federal government, where we can do a little bit larger projects. We target these projects on the streets that have a history of injuries. In fact, we have what we call it's called a high injury network. the high injury network makes up about 16% of our streets, yet accounts for, over half of our injury crashes. So we are targeting our investments not just where people say, oh, I think this is unsafe, because, everyone feels like certain areas are unsafe, but where the data says it's unsafe. We also have a couple of other overlays in that we like to, I'm going to say there are some communities of color, environmental and equity areas where the residents maybe don't have as great an access to the system. They don't know how to say, hey, this isn't great or whatever, and so we are able to do some overlays to say, well, here are some very dangerous places, and here are some of these places that are occurring in, our communities of color or our equity areas. And we want to make sure that they are treated as well, and receive the improvements that they deserve, just like other places in the city receive improvements.
Yeah. And for folks who aren't transportation nerds or paying attention to equity and those sorts of pieces, what's really obvious, right, when you plot the data out, you can start to see the trends of where, some of these vulnerabilities are, overlay with how our transportation systems were built and structured, and where, largely populations of community of color were living. In fact, that us being named the second most walkable city in that report, the National Complete Streets Coalition, the report points out that Black Americans, for instance, are killed at double the rate of white Americans, which is likely in part because of those neighborhoods having more high-speed roads, having those larger roads. How are you thinking about, as we continue to improve our streets and our transportation systems, how are you thinking about creating safer streets for all in that sense?
Well, as I mentioned, part of our rating metric includes, is this in we call it an environmental justice area as mapped by the Greater Madison MPO. And so the rating rubric that we use to select projects, that is a factor. And so if this is in an area that's been historically underserved and who may not have access to the same city systems and committees that other neighborhoods have, they get a little bump in the scoring. And so that we just want to make sure that communities that have perhaps received less investment over the years are not shortchanged now. They're considered. Actually, I'm going to say that the North-South Bus Rapid Transit was just recently approved. And
yay!
Yeah, that's a huge thing. Over 40% of the people that's going to serve are people of color. It's going to do some of our traditional communities of color in the north and south sides. But with that, we're also going to be able to reconstruct Park Street and make it actually a more human-centered street. It's going to have a side path, a shared use path, so that if you're a parent in that community and you want your kid to bike to the Goodman Library, they'll be able to do it. So we're trying to focus, particularly some of our federal investments, to make sure that we're bringing up some of our neighborhoods that maybe been underserved in the past.
And I love this. Until I started talking to you, Tom, I didn't recognize just how big of a factor how wide the road is to people speeding. That's something that that you guys are working on and educating folks about. And you brought up bus rapid transit, which many of us Madisonians are excited about. I suppose some people are concerned. It's a big change. But how would you describe the impact you expect bus rapid transit to have on, our Vision Zero vision?
Well, I think the bus rapid transit provides choice. I think maybe that's a good thing. For instance, on the north-south bus rapid transit line, 20% are car-free households. So think about it. You're on that line and you don't have access to a car. So how do you get your groceries? When you go to the doctor, how do you go there? And then do you have to take a 2.5-hour bus ride to get there? Is that fair? So I think what we're trying to do is we want people to have choices that are competitive with the auto, but they're also more sustainable choices, right? If you're on a bus, you're emitting half of the carbon dioxide than you would be if you were in a car, and our electric buses is probably going to be much less. Historically, a trip on transit takes twice as long as a trip in your car. Can we knock that down with our bus rapid transit so that maybe it's going to be a little bit longer, but it's still competitive? It's easier. Now think about just even the car storage. Do you know that if you eliminate the the car storage in houses, and on the street. Just in our businesses, we have 350,000. It's more human beings than we have in Madison.
Wow.
And that's just in our businesses. So, can we provide another option that's more sustainable, that's safer, and it provides access to kind of a whole spectrum of our residents.
And it kind of narrows the road with those bus lanes. That's what I was thinking in terms of like literal, like visual, what the streets feel like. Automobiles, you're not the main guy anymore in town. It's very cool and clear. And y'all are updating city streets constantly. You just have to walk outside to see construction, all across the city. How much work does the city do on rebuilding our roads, like say in a given year?
I have to look at our engineering budget, but maybe $20 to $30 million is spent on reconstructing roadways. Now, our bus rapid transit has given us the opportunity to reconstruct some things using federal dollars, right? And we always like to use federal dollars when we can because, each resident here, we give our taxes to the federal government, right? And so when we can get some of the money that we give to the federal government back, it's a win for everyone in the city of Madison. We will be reducing of lanes during the, I'm going to say, off-peak hours on East Washington. And East Washington historically has been an area where sometimes we experience challenges, right? When you have 3 lanes and it's wide open and there's hardly, there's no traffic on an evening, people feel like, yeah, let's go fast.
Also, it used to be a place where people drag raced, and I'm not talking about RuPaul.
Yeah. And so
but literally raced, yeah.
So I think we can, by having the bus lane, having the parking during, weekends and evenings will make it just a little bit less attractive to be drag racing on East Washington, maybe similarly on Park Street.
Well, I know that you are a biker yourself, and you've been at the helm of city transportation for the past 6 years. Like, what would you say the hallmark of your administration's efforts are for transforming the city of Madison's systems?
Well, first, I think I have to just acknowledge it. It's really been team and a combination of factors. Like we've had a very supportive council with many alders that have been huge advocates. We've had a mayor that really feels like we need sustainable and safe transportation. We've made some internal changes too, but I will say over the past 6 years, our paradigm has changed from making sure cars can get through to making sure people can get through. So it's been more people focused, and through that, we've got the Vision Zero, the Safe Streets Madison, the North-South BRT, the East-West BRT, the transit network redesign, the transit-oriented design. Just really a focus on let's make this a great city for people and transporting people to where they need.
Sounds like a good idea. And we've got some train discussions coming up this summer as well, right? There's going to be some meetings about possible Amtrak or passenger rail, right?
Yeah. With the bipartisan infrastructure law, they put a 500% increase for passenger rail. So if there was ever really a time for us to try and capture passenger rail again, we lost it in 1972. Now's the time. Amtrak is very interested in bringing service to Madison. And so we're working with partners and other communities that are interested and see if we can get that directed back here.
Well, Director Lynch, it has been such a pleasure. I wish I could talk to you for another 20 minutes. Thank you for taking the time to join us on CityCast Madison.
Yeah, thanks. This has been great. Thanks, Bianca.
That's Tom Lynch, Director of Transportation for the City of Madison. If you want to learn more about city initiatives like Vision Zero, Green Streets, BRT, or passenger rail, go ahead to our show notes for a link. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with your walk-in or strolling partner? If you don't have one, go invite somebody to walk or stroll and share this episode with them first. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, go enjoy these good Madison streets.